Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome back to Siraat Al-Ghuraba, Path of the Strangers, the strangest podcast in the dunya. My name is Hudayfa. I'm joined with my regular co-host Zahid and Abdullah, and today we have brother Gasim. He is from Sham, and today's episode actually we're going to be discussing Sham and the recent events in Syria. I'm sure many of you, our viewers, are keeping up with what's going on. And we wanted to invite Brother Gasim on, who grew up in Syria, saw some of this firsthand, and discuss and enlighten not only us, but our viewers, inshallah, on what's going on and what has happened in the past. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, we welcome Brother Gasim. Assalamu alaikum. How are you doing?
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum to all of you guys. Like the
Alaikum
brother
salam.
mentioned, I did grow up in Sham, and the story of many people from Sham goes beyond kind of the 14 years of that we have been seeing this revolution play out. If we were to go back a couple of generations to my grandfather, he was born during a turbulent time that kind of shaped today. He was born in the year 1891, kind of around the final years of the Ottoman state, kind of the last known stable state for Shem. And then building up, my grandmother was born in the 20s under the French mandate, that debacle of colonialism, and she raised me for many years, heard many stories about that as well. And then my father, when he was born in the 1960s, 64, this is kind of the time that the father of the current president, or the president that was removed, was kind of taking root in the military. He was first the Minister of Defense at the time, and then 1970 when he did his coup and kind of came into power. Moving on to my life, I studied in Syria in late 90s, early 2000s. I remember living under Assad the father, Assad the son, and it helps us develop kind of helping this experience, this family experience, kind of helped me develop an appreciation, kind of what happened and culminated in the collapse of the regime. So I mean, alhamdulillah, this is a good start to an end. We hope to see more, inshallah, khair come out of this. But this is if you guys have any questions, I think this is kind of a way to kind of like to open the platform for questions. I'd be willing to give some insight, whether it's past, beyond my own lifespan, and beyond, inshallah.
Yeah,
Inshallah.
inshallah, I think it would be help to set the context and kind of get an understanding on a high level, just to paint the picture for the audience. But just to ask you a more like personal question. So, like, what was your life like, in Syria, like growing up there? Like, what was your experience under the regime? And of course, now you can say everything and anything, but definitely would like to hear that experience.
So my experience kind of starts 10 years, maybe even more than that, before I was born. My experience starts in the 1980s when my dad fled the country. My dad fled the country in 82, 83, and that was his last moment. I guess that would have been his last memory. The family experience, my family experience begins, at least my personal experience with this regime starts 10 years before my birth. Kind of when my dad fled the country in 82, 83. He was a teenager, and that was kind of the beginning of some of the misjustice that occurred to my family personally. Um, he died 39 years later. Never saw his hometown. Didn't see many of his relatives again. Created a lot of trauma and a lot of heartbreak and a host of other things. But what I remember is even young, at that age of 4, I don't know how kind of fear begets fear. But even at the age of 4, this is kind of like a moment in my life when I was living with my grandmother, away from both of my parents. I understood certain unsaid, unspoken rules of society. I understood the fear that existed alone, that there were unspoken, I guess, conversations, that there were certain elements out there to get you. The whole notion that walls have ears was omnipresent. The I guess the bureaucracy of life. If you wanted to put your children in school, you had to have some kind of security clearance from the government. If you wanted to stay in the country, you had to get certain approvals, and the harassment that happened at every every little minute, I guess transaction in life.
Wow. Okay.
The harassment, the I guess extortion, the bribery that occurred. I remember, taking the very first rides in the car. You drive past kind of these security barracks and roadblocks, and it's kind of like or you're told. I can't remember being told, but you kind of know not to look towards the officers. Uh, you know that you don't walk towards them if you see them driving down the street. You know that's just danger. And at the time, I knew I had cousins that I hadn't been able to see at the time. And they were in prison. I later found out, but a lot of the details kind of were murky about it. But we understood that this is for real. This is not like in the West over here where there isn't that boogeyman that's out there to get
Right.
10% of your family or 5% or whatever it is that they claim that they detained and tortured and made an example of.
Good.
You
My,
know, this is kind of the the most prevalent, I guess, face of the regime. Other phases of the regime is just the corruption. Uh, this was a country. Yes, it is beautiful. Its people are very hospitable. Its people are, they have the general spirit of just the heritage of the Islamic history that lives in the area, but it's impoverished. It's surrounded by a lot of different corruption in I guess in society. There was, I remember, you know certain aspects that bothered, I think, that would bother the Muslim community at a larger, from the way, I'm trying to word this in a nice way.
Hmm.
I mean, like
Right.
the imagery that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
back in the 1990s, and
Hmm.
it was upsetting to some people.
Ghasim, which city did you and your family grow up in?
Oh, this is pivotal. Actually, we grew up in. My dad is from Dara, so
Okay.
the city of the revolution. As a
Got
matter
it.
of fact, the Jama and the masjid that ended up being the rally point and kind of the rendezvous point for the Friday gatherings is only probably like 200 meters from our front door.
Wow. Okay.
Of course, this was a totally different Jama and masjid when I was attending. Juma,
Hmm.
very very scripted, and a lot of fear. And in fact, people were afraid to even go to normal and regular prayer. This is We found out very recently why. Just regularly attending is accusation itself
I see.
in Syria.
Yeah, the things that are coming out now, like it's things that I didn't even imagine. Like they would make a list of people going to Fajr congregation, and they would
Yeah.
make a list of people that are going to Jummah. When you were there, did you feel like Islam was something that they didn't want to push because if they knew that Islam would grow in someone's mind, then that person might start questioning the environment they're living in, and they might want to rebel against what they're seeing, the corruption that they're seeing on a day-to-day basis. Did you feel like there was
Um,
kind of a stifling of I guess freedom when it comes to the deen?
so the moment I actually arrived in Syria was kind of a turning point in the entire Muslim world as a whole. I think a lot of these accusations, they were probably before the time that we arrived in Syria, and possibly later years after kind of I settled back in the States. The reason was, I think, that there was just this greater need for certain Islamic factions in the Muslim world. Also, some of these tyrants found Islam as a way to actually release some of that tension. So when I was in Syria, I think there was an encouragement of Muslims to listen to certain sheikhs. There was an encouragement of Muslims to attend, but not to get too deep into it. I think they didn't want you attending and praying regularly. I think that those were kind of red flags probably for them. But you were not going to get picked up for praying, Fajr
Mm.
once or twice.
Mm.
But it was very well known that first row of prayers, just intelligence officers,
Wow.
and they had a certain look to them. They'd show up normally with their they were really nicely dressed and sunglasses and a
Yeah.
blazer and a white shirt,
Wow.
a lot of gel on the hair, and
They,
they looked kind of out of place, but they prayed.
Uh, so, Brother Gasim, describe for me. So you mentioned earlier, it's like the walls have ears. You don't look towards a security guard. You don't walk towards them. You keep an eye.
Not security guards, security apparatus. I'm talking about the intelligence, secret police. I'm talking about military intelligence. So in the states, this is kind of like a weird, I guess, concept. But the security apparatus in the Middle East, you have kind of like what we call Fira Palestine, which is like Fira Palestine would have been like a government body to basically regulate like the Palestinians' normal affairs, the refugees, and then you have the Jawiya, like the Air Force intelligence. Every single like body of military eventually has its own security apparatus. Eventually, like even normal DMV style offices will have their own interrogation offices, and they'll have their own, I guess, security apparatus. So, I mean, this was a hodgepodge, hot mess of just everybody's a spy. Every department has got spies. Every department has got jails. Every department has torture cells.
So now, what are the? My question is, what are the consequences of someone who is stepping out of line? What's that fear based on? What's going to happen? What's the bad news?
Um, Disappearing. I mean, the ultimate, I guess, uh, at the time, because this was a time where there wasn't any internet. I'm talking about 98, 99, 2000s. Uh, this was a time where internet was probably just getting started here in the states, let alone overseas. And internet wasn't even allowed. I think until, if I had to guess, maybe 2003, 2004, when it was officially legalized. Cell phones were illegal in the country. We didn't have a cell network. So information was passed, I guess, word of mouth or print, and print was a death sentence. So we didn't have a clear picture of what happens, once somebody disappears, other than you just, God knows.
one day you're just with the brother, and that brother might just disappear. I mean that's the
I
story
mean,
I'm hearing.
in the 1990s, I think that there was, at least at the time, there was a lot of people who were taken. Uh, it was a hot time for Syria because of their involvement in Lebanon, and they still had not concluded. And I think a lot of people who served in the military, they had false accusations ran against them. People who had served in Lebanon for whatever, refusing to shoot, refusing, showing some kind of insubordination. I have a cousin that was killed in Lebanon. We still don't know what the reason was, but he was shot in the back while serving for this regime. This was their thing in return for their thanks for service.
Oh my
Um,
God.
And Ghassan, I wanted to ask, so at what age did you and your family move to the States? And from then, did you often go back home and visit, or was that off limits?
so so my dad moved to the states in '83. I was
Okay.
born in '93 in the states, but
Okay.
my dad decided to send us over because of just societal, religious, and
Mhm.
other things that he wants to
Right.
experiences.
Growing up in that environment, right? Like, did you ever think? Well, there's a couple questions that I have. Is like, I heard that during the khutbahs or during the du'as they made after the Jummah khutbah, they would make dua for the regime, for the family, the Assad family. Is this is it something that you saw when you were there? Was that something that you saw personally?
Uh, yeah, actually, one of my cousins is was khatib in one of the Jawama, and I know that their khutab used to come kind of sealed and written by the Ministry of Awqaf,
Mm,
and praying for the ruler, as is the case in every other Muslim country, Arab Muslim country that I know of. Yeah, it was mandated, and I told you that first line of regular prayers were there to make sure of it. I mean, we
mm.
knew it, they knew it, it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, how they find.
So I'm actually wondering, and maybe I need to do a deep dive into the history of this family and the regime and the region. But I want to ask you if you can briefly describe how this so the current the tyrant that just got, that just left the country, Bashar al-Assad, his father, Hafiz al-Assad, he was installed, by someone. My
Mhm.
question is, how did, so after they followed the Uthmani Khilafah and the loss of this region and the Sykes-Picot, who how did Hafiz al-Assad get into power?
Um, this is a very loaded question because you're talking about sort of 7 years of history right there from the the collapse of the Khilafah in Asham kind of collapses with World War One, the 1920s, 1919, 1920. They're somewhere. This is kind of when the revolutionaries, the Arab revolutionaries, the Ashraf, Prince Faisal, he's put as king. But that doesn't last very long, and the French show up to kind of lay claim to what they were promised by the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And they rule Syria for until 1945, where at the conclusion of World War II, they are under pressure to I guess abandon their colonial I guess claim to it. Now during kind of these years, you have this hodgepodge mess where the British kind of claim presidency once, and then the French claim presidency, and then in 1949, and what I think, I'm not sure, I could be corrected, but I believe what is the first coup d'état that the CIA orchestrates, the United States CIA orchestrates, according to their own, um, I guess, their own account, is by installing their man in Damascus, Hosni Zaim. This is in 1949. So this is maybe 3 years after independence.
Hmm.
Of course, he doesn't last very long, and nor does any other president last very long, really, until between the years of the independence in 1945 up until 1970. I did the research, and I think that the longest reigning president was something to the tune of a little bit over 2 years.
Wow.
So this is something to keep in mind. Some of them as short as 1 day, if not hours. Many of them, yeah. So this is a fast moving. This is very fast paced. And when I looked at this, it drew my attention to something. I know this is kind of an unrelated case, but when the United States withdrew out of Afghanistan, everybody kind of laid their eye. Kind of this describes the kind of people that you're dealing with. They said that Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires. This is where empires come to die.
Mhm.
So they're a warrior nation, right? And this got me thinking. We know that the people of Sham are a warrior nation, but there's something else that kind of came to my attention. So I did some digging deeper, and I looked at kind of the dynasty that is best known for in Sham, the one that is uncontested, the king of dynasties in Sham, and for us that's the Umayyad Khilafah.
Hmm.
They are by far the uncontested. To this day, we name everything after the Umayyads. Uh, I'm not talking about some of their character flaws, but I'm talking about kind of what they did to the region, the greater Muslim region as a whole. They ruled from Damascus and they spread Islam to the Far East as well as all the way to Andalus. And they're credited for a lot of things within their 80 something years of rule. Subhanallah, I want you to just kind of imagine this. I think it was Muawiyah that ruled 19 years and Marwan ibn Abdul Malik that ruled 20 years. There are 13 others, and they average 2 years, 3 years, 4 years at best.
Hmm.
And their entire dynasty almost didn't last as much as two of these presidents in the end. So, I mean, one of the things that I kind of concluded just studying this history of Asham, they're warriors, number one, and number two, they're hard to govern in peacetime.
Hmm.
They don't take a lot of crap. And what ended up happening is, when we look at kind of Husni Zaim, he was the opening, I guess, he was the opening play for the U.S.'s ambition to the Middle East. So what had happened is the old guards of the Middle East were the French and the English,
Hmm.
and then after the aftermath of World War II, exhausted. They need to rebuild their own countries. They're not as economically strong. The new guard is by far the United States. They come to claim their territory. This is 1949,
Hmm.
and they do this with the rest of the rest of the players. We see that the United States is behind Jamal Abdel Nasser again. This is American account. This was contested. It's no longer contested. It's pretty clear to anybody who has any sense. We see that the United States enters a battle in Iran. We see that the United States enters a battle, in the Gulf states and in Jordan as well. At a time, there was an assassination against one of their kings. Um, so I don't want to go through the entire history, but there were reports written kind of at the time, and the United States kind of looks for somebody who's very reliable,
Hmm.
somebody who's really well at doing his job. And there are several tests to kind of like scope out who can do this job within the military apparatus, because they are not going to come through the choice of the people, or hard to govern, hard to appease. These people you know can't last a couple of years without replacing somebody, right?
Right.
Hmm.
Without going to the streets, without seeking change. And in the 1960s, one of these people was Hafez al-Assad, who was first part of the Air Force. He was an officer in the Air Force, and then later on he rises to become the not prime minister, but the Minister of Defense. In 1967, we see how reliable this man is. In 1967, he basically allowed uh, what is the equivalent of the surrender of the Golan Heights,
Hmm.
and he gave it up in less than 6 hours. It's called the Six-Day War. But if you were to follow kind of the events of the day, you can go. It's all available. You can see that he called for a what we call in Arabic an involuntary withdrawal, not an involuntary. I don't know how to explain it, but uncoordinated, I guess, is more an uncoordinated withdrawal, which is kind of a level in military command where it's like drop your weapons and run for life,
Hmm.
run for your life. And he was on the radio announcing that towns were basically occupied before the Israeli army ever reached them. Um, as well as other services that he provided. So when time came, the United States had their eye on who was going to take control. The other thing is this was a very ambitious. He was very ambitious. So he's not just very reliable to them, but he's also very ambitious and very ruthless. So his way of ascending to power, ironically, after he had you know been a traitor and betrayed the amana bestowed upon him, he turns around on a day where all his colleagues, basically his group of friends that he had participated with in an earlier, I guess, successful coup attempt, to be it, and he has them in a meeting where I don't know what the meeting was about. They
Hmm.
say that it was some speculation say that they were getting ready to get rid of him, or they wanted to hold him accountable,
Hmm.
and he just shows up and arrests everybody.
Wow.
And after the arrest, he doesn't use the word coup. He says that this is a corrective movement and that these guys are traitors and that I have basically dirt on all of these people. Uh, and it becomes clear. This is kind of sort of like the scene from Saddam Hussein where he shows up and he starts just spitting out names and
Yeah.
arresting people, taking them outside, shooting them. So this is what he does. This is what he does to the military, I guess, military establishment, and then he moves on. He moves on to do the same in kind of like the intellectual circles and in the, I guess, ministries, governing bodies, and representatives as well. And he did this with the carrot and stick, I guess, throughout the 70s.
Hmm.
Throughout the 70s, he was kind of. This is again. I just want to rewind a little bit to the time of the Umayyads. So I was telling you that you see this in You can deduce this out of just the periods that they rule. You rule for a couple of years, a year, sometimes a day, and these are people that are iconic.
Hmm.
Um, but then you also see it in the way that Muawiyah governed. Again, despite his character flaws, he gave the world the policy of what we call Sha'arat Muawiyah, the hair of Muawiyah, where he says, "I leave between me and between the people a strand of hair. If they pull, I release, so it doesn't break. And if they release, I take the opportunity to pull them closer."
Hmm.
So this is kind of the his analogy to how these people are governed, and this was kind of like his response to when he was asked, "Why don't you govern them like we governed in the Gulf, like in Mecca and Medina, like just be strict with them?" He said that these people, you can't do that with them. You have to be there. These people requires some intellectual and reason to be able to be governed. And he was known, at least the beginning of the Umayyad, I guess, era was known. They were known for their generosity with their subjects. They were known for instituting institutions for medicine, I guess, education, and so on and so forth. I think even that the concept of waqf was born from that period. A lot of the institutions that then kind of become the norm when we look at Al-Andalus or we look at Baghdad, kind of were their ideas. Although the services themselves are maybe required by Islam, but the structure and the way they look were kind of like adopted from this era and period. So I mean, this is kind of what the first presidents of Syria do, and this is kind of what Hafez al-Assad tries to do. Now he runs into issues early on in his rule. And one of the first issues that he runs into is that uh, one of the strongest, or I guess, movements in the country was one of the Muslim Brotherhood. I'll just put it out there.
Hmm.
And there's a faction within the Muslim Brotherhood that is saying that this is a non-Muslim. Non-Muslims are not allowed to govern Muslims, and he comes from a sect that is deemed outside the fold of Orthodox Islam.
If I
Islam as a whole.
if I might just stop you there, so the sect, of course, like the Alawis, is there anything you can say like about their doctrine, like what they believe in on a high level? Like it's pretty unanimous, right? That they're not within the fold of Ahlul Sunnah, right?
Yeah, yeah, they don't claim to be. They hadn't claimed to be. I think even the Shia at that time considered them outside the fold. They had different beliefs to what we believe in.
Mhm.
The final message from Muhammad. Um, yeah, and this poses a problem for him. He takes out I guess one of those cheaper by the dozen fatwas saying that he accepted. He puts out rumors that he accepted Sunni Islam, starts showing up at the mosques, puts out
Yeah.
fatwas saying that Alawis are Muslims as well, despite the fact that he claims that he's not Alawi. And then I mean he goes both ways.
Mm.
He leans where his benefit is and where his interests are. To his clients, he's Alawi because this is kind of the officer. I didn't mention kind of the exodus of the Sunnis in the army, in the military, in the 1970s and 80s,
Mhm.
starting in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But I don't know if you want to put that in there.
So just to get the demographic, just for like myself and the viewers, the demographic of Syria is, from what I read, around 80%, 85% Muslim, and then you have like 10 to 15% Christian, um, and then
Mhm.
you have like a remaining maybe couple percentage for they say Druze or other minorities. Is that kind of the demographic in Syria?
Um, to my knowledge, the Muslims are probably close to 85%,
Okay.
and the
So
15% I would say is everybody else.
yeah, yeah. So I guess just to go off that point, right? So a lot of times we hear like Syria is multi-ethnic, multi-religious, but of course a majority are Muslims, and they're Muslims that want Islam. And just to kind of bring the discussion to kind of more modern day, right? So of course you went through like the history with Sykes-Picot. You go through kind of the turmoil that occurred afterwards. How the state was divided, the different rulers. There was a time of coups that were happening left and right. So I guess my question is why was Syria so central to the Arab Spring, and can you kind of explain the Arab Spring as well to the viewers to kind of get into more modern history?
The Arab Spring, I think this is again, I get to kind of go back to what I was talking about Afghanistan and Syria. The Arab Spring in every single country had different I guess objectives. Really,
Mhm.
if you look at it, there are certain countries that are impoverished. All of them are impoverished, but certain countries you see that this is kind of the main aspect. There are certain countries where they've lost their voice. You see this being kind of the aspect that takes over. Um, but again, it's what's surfacing right now. It's what's surfacing right now that really shows kind of the aspirations of the people of Syria. The people of Syria saw that there was a change in the region,
Mhm.
and they had their own aspirations. Their own aspirations, if you look at it, I think, I think, are Islamic, and I can explain to you why this is
Mhm.
Islamic. Number one is because if you watch any of these videos, the returning theme is that you are being punished because you believe in what in Islam. So you see them not only beating people up because they went against the regime or beating the people up because I don't know some benefit they're asking for. They humiliate you by asking you to proclaim that your Lord and God is Bashar instead of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see this in the demeanor of the Assad's regime. So they've been writing on the walls for, as far as I can remember, and probably as far as my dad can remember, things like your Allah will fall and Bashar will rule. Things like that. Yeah. I mean, there's footage of a young child, maybe 13 or 14, being beat up and has markings all over his body, and the officer is telling him, "Who is your Lord?" And he says, "Allah." And then he beats him up and says, "No, Bashar." Then he says, "Who's greater, Bashar or Allah?" And under torture, this person is being humiliated to say this. There are pictures that you can see right now from Hama in the 1980s when they went inside to destroy it and kill 40,000 people. When they left, they left the writing on the wall saying there is no religion but Ba'ath, and there is no prophet except Assad. Something to the tune of that. Like this was very prevalent, and then to a certain extent, uh, the other aspect of it is Bilad al-Sham has a history, a very long history. I don't want to talk about the history going back to when the Persians fought the Romans. It's not conducive, but it has a long history, and like you said, it is multi-ethnic. It is multi-ethnic. Yes, we are Muslims, but the truth is this is a land of, yes, people who came from the Arab Peninsula. But it's also home to people who are from Kurdish descent. It's home to Turkmens. It's home to Chechens, Circassians that fled the war, Armenians, Greeks who are Muslim who fled persecution in Crete,
Mhm.
uh, Bosniaks that fled the Balkans during the 1800s. So it has this hodgepodge, some of them old, some of them new, and then it has these other minorities that they're not even from the Muslim faith, and what you see is these people have existed. What the Syrian people see is these people have existed and lived and survived for 1,300 years, maybe even more. What kept this school together? How did we prosper together? How did we not have this division? How did we not have this low level of existence? Uh, and when you look at it, you look at the periods where we prospered, the periods that we fell. I think it becomes clear where our izz and where our I guess glory and power comes from. It's from this idea that Muhammad SAW came with, and it is the only justice that really saves both the Muslim and the non-Muslim. I mean, we have
Mm.
experiences when the French came in and the British came in. The Christians were some of the first to actually renounce this kind of occupation because they were subjected to similar levels of persecution. And when the United States marches into to Iraq, not to glorify Saddam Hussein, God forbid, but the last remaining population of Chaldeans and Assyrians, Christians, and dwindled to almost nothing.
mm, mm,
So I mean, they see first they see that these minorities see that when our local leaders do not implement Islam, they're subject to injustice. When the West comes in with other than Islam, they're subject to injustice, and everybody's looking for this solution. Everybody's looking for this time of greatness. When you see the factions, they march in, and they want to show that they're going to be just. They always start off where they start off in the masjid of Bani Umayyah,
mm,
and this is kind of there's no I mean there's no way of making this look secular, liberal. This is the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the
mm,
people marched out, this was not the Tahrir Square, this was not any the main square in Damascus. This was the mosques that harbored this kind of thinking. Those are young men who are strong believers in this idea. I mean, Syria does not have a lack of pluralism when it comes to political parties and
mm.
factions. We have communist groups, we have socialist groups with large, very large, I guess, amount of followers and adherents. You have Christians that number in the hundreds of thousands, but the people that took the brunt of this I guess beat up by 39 countries were young Muslim men who have this aqidah. They
Mm,
are the ones that finally marched into Damascus and said, "This is the day that this ends."
mm.
So I mean,
Yeah, yes, subhanallah. It reminds you of,
whilst when you see, well, uh-huh.
no, 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 please continue with your last point, and then I'll make my point
Whilst when
after,
you
inshallah.
look at other uh-huh. When you look at some of the other countries, this was not very important. They didn't have the same slogans that we did. Uh, as noble as taking down any tyrant is, this was a different, I guess, form of protest and revolution.
So subhanallah, even during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he mentioned how the people of Sham are blessed, and when we mention the people of Sham, it's not just the people in Syria. The Sham is a bigger region, just and it encompasses the
Absolutely.
whole area. But if you look at even the geographic location, and how blessed that geographic location is, where you're between the crossroads of east and west. You're right under Turkey. You're you're right in the middle of all these different um, nations, and all these different, even during the time of the Romans and the Persians. I mean, Syria was right in between those battles, right? So we see just how geographically, Syria is in such an optimal location, and I believe that's why it's so focused on it, and by any empire, by the Western Empire that we see today, the imperialists, the colonialists. They want to focus in this region, particularly because of how, like you mentioned, the strength of the Muslims there, the young Muslims there, and also just the location that where it's at.
So Sham is vital. Going back to the time that I mean, I said I don't want to focus too much on this, but I think it was 500 BC where we see the first clash for this area between the Persians and the Romans, and then it continues on until the time of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, around 610, where Islam rises and removes both. Um, but one of the things that we kind of like see throughout the Islamic history, because I want to focus on Islamic history right here, is that the entire Muslim world, almost every single rise after the fall, there are two regions that are critical to one control and two unite, and those are Egypt, Kinana, and Bilad al-Sham. Anytime these two have united, the Muslim ummah has arisen. They have strategic importance. The other empires realize this. This is the cradle to most of the civilizations known to humanity, whether it's the Roman or the Persian Empire. Uh, this is the way it's been forever, and this is the way it continues to be. So this is why you see when the people of Sham and the people of Mosul, we hope that they realize their revolution against tyranny as well. Uh,
Subhanallah. that reminds me, even like, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, he liberated Jerusalem from the Crusaders, and he was able to do that because of the unity between Egypt and Sham and Syria and that region. So
Yeah, I mean, this is not just the Islamic khilafat the khulafat that we had, but this is every empire in the region. Once you conquer these two, those are the pivotal points to controlling the region. They realize this, and this is what I was saying earlier. When America does their opening move, they go to where? They go to Damascus.
mhm,
A few years later, this was 1949. I think it was in 1954 when they did their coup with what they call the free generals or the Dubat al-Ahrar in Egypt, and they're very adamant to hold power over these two regions for a very long time. And we see that every single defeat against the Muslims somehow, in one way or another, emanates from those two regions.
mhm,
Whether it is the Sham and Masr were pivotal. The tyrants of Sham and Masr, Egypt and Sham, were pivotal in the establishment of the modern state and its growth, its protection.
mhm.
We see this We see this very clearly, whether it's from the Jordanian side, the Syrian side, or the Egyptian side. We see that these people are more Zionists than Netanyahu than himself.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Brother Gasim, I want to ask you a question. You mentioned earlier that the within the Arab Spring that started in 2011, the slogans you mentioned were in Syria. The people of Syria were different than those in Egypt and in Tunisia and other areas. Why do you say they were different? I want to dig deep on this.
Uh, I mean, there are differences in just the makeup of these societies. These are true facts. We cannot deny them. It's not a prejudice towards one group of people or another. But the people of Damascus, number one, they I heard this on a podcast that was done by Dr. Gilani
Mhm.
a few days ago, and I think it was recorded before the events in Syria, but it came out just after the events in Syria. You guys can go and look it up. But he says one thing that kind of caught my attention, and I've been looking over different reports my entire life. I hadn't come to this piece of information. He says Kissinger in 1973, I think, or in the aftermath of 1973, he did a report and he penned a report by himself, and he says this region is very difficult to control because they have not been sufficiently colonized,
Mhm.
and he uses the word sufficiently colonized. I don't know if you guys have seen this podcast, and this kind of just feeds back to kind of these people. If you don't give them something that is something that they can take by brain, by reason, something that is convincing, they will call it out. And some regions in the Middle East, by the words of Kissinger, have been more colonized. They've been more accepting, or they've had colonialism, just forced down their throats longer. This is one of the first things. I mean, this is a rebellious kind of people,
Mhm.
whereas I think other regions, they're not as rebellious. They don't have it in their culture. They be more pacifist. I
Mhm.
remember watching kind of like an interview for, I don't know if you guys know Ahmed Mansour. He does Shahad al Asr, does witness to kind of time is what it's called. He interviews all these ex presidents and ex generals, and he was doing a podcast, and he was talking about different I guess cultures and different societies. And he was talking about his experiences, kind of interviewing some of these people. He talks about when he did the interview with the first president of Indonesia, and he says when the French colonists they showed up at what was then Indochina. He said basically, we, from the culture of these people, they're pacifists. They said, we don't want to fight, rule, allow us to worship, and that was it. And then kind of he talks about the rest. But the people of Shem, they're so hell bent on this idea of reasoning, being convinced. If we're not convinced, we'll call you out for it. We will resist you for 100 years,
Mhm.
which is what they did with the French. Again, this is part of the report that he's talking about when he says they have not been sufficiently colonized. He says that they resisted from day one of the French, and they continued without stop. So this is not periods where we see in certain colonial like experiments where you see okay they had a revolt in 1919 and then it went for 6 7 years. No, this is 30 years or whatever it was,
Hmm.
25 30 years of colonialism, and they are battling it one battle after the other for the entire duration. These people are not armed like the French. These people do not have the means financially. They're cornered, but still they refuse to basically accept this colonialism. And we see this until 1970 when he came with this barbarism, Hafez Assad, the father. They continue this kind of resistance. So they see this world is changing. There's hope that there is this mass communication, and the people of Sham obviously they're going to come out with what fits to their last image of working, and this is Islam. This is why in the 1980s, when people started to see kind of like off track, we want to go back to track. What did they call for in the 1980s? Call for Islam,
Hmm.
and it was again as it is today. It was the Muslim youth. Not, I guess I'll say this again. We don't have a lack of socialist, communist, you know, atheist thinkers in Syria. Plenty of them.
Hmm.
They have their adherents. They don't do the work. They don't believe in their work to do it. They don't believe in standing up in front of Assad or going to these prisons. I mean, you have some cherry picked, I guess, blown out of proportion characters that they have, but not in the masses that the Muslims have.
Hmm.
And again, when people sense or smell this hope, this is only natural. It's going to come out. It was only bound to explode. So I mean, this is why I think to answer your question, why they chose Islam is because this is kind of what fits in the brain. This is what convinces them. This is what makes their heart, I guess, at peace.
Yeah.
This is the justice that they know will work.
So I think very very profound points you made. The next thing I want to move to is the events we saw happen last week. Um, you mentioned earlier that the people of Sham, they will resist for 100 years, and we saw in the past. Is that what we saw last week? Is this the same mentality, same vision, same that same zeal? Is that what we saw last week?
Hmm.
And now I have to switch over from my words of like I have to switch to being the analyst and the devil's advocate. Um, what we saw, I think, last week was a shock. I think to a lot of
Yeah.
people.
Hmm.
I think if I'm being honest, yes, these people do have zeal, but I think at one point of resisting, probably in the last 14 years, more than they've resisted over the past 1,300 years of betrayal and treason. This is how much treason has been, injected into this revolution. Sadly, I think a lot of people lost their energy. I mean, people wanted to break at some point. But what had happened was, subhanallah, just a mix of, it's just a soup of coincidences and Allah's planning that
Hmm.
eventually culminated in the regime collapsing on its own, under its own weight. Um,
So,
I don't know if you want me to go deep into the analysis of how kind of it happened.
really quick, I want to stop you right there, Qasim. I want to ask you this. You
Huh.
did mention that the Assad family was a very capable, very trusted, you know, agent of the West, a tool for the West. Why is it that now all of a sudden, end of 2024, we saw last week, he's clearly been ousted. Um, what are your thoughts on, why did the West kind of throw one of their most pivotal tools to maintain stability in that region out, and what's kind of the outlook on this now?
So you said it yourself. If they replace Assad, then most likely that they have found somebody who can kind of shoulder the burden that Assad shouldered for a very long time. Um, to a certain extent with a different face and a fresh set of paint. I will talk about this a little bit more extent, but first I kind of want to go back in my history.
Mm-hmm.
When I we used to take breaks during the summertime and return kind of when school starts in Syria. And I remember returning after one summer, and and the first president, Hafez Assad, had passed away, and it was on the ride
Mm-hmm.
back to Dar'a from Damascus, a 1 hour drive with my uncle. I remember, I don't know, maybe I was like 6 or 7 at the time. I just asked him. I said, "So they say we have a new president?" And he says, "Yeah, they say this guy is good. He prays Fajr at the Jama." And Hafez Assad, he comes in at the time. I know this sounds funny now. At the time, the hope of the country. If you had told them Khalid bin Walid, they probably would have been less excited. This is a doctor,
Wow.
somebody who was educated in the West. He carries ideas. He's talking about reforms. He's actually talking about corruption existing. And people are seeing him pray in the masjids. I remember, I think it was like 2 or 3 years after that, he came to our very city, prayed in the Jama that will later give birth to his destruction.
Wow.
Yeah.
Subhanallah.
So people are giving this guy a chance, and this is what we kind of see right now. They all come with a fresh paint, fresh coat of paint. Now, what happened, I think was out of pocket, really, for the West. And I kind of hinted at this. I think that the regime collapsed under its own weight,
Mm.
and this is one of the things that I think happened. The other thing that I think happened is that the regime became too much of a liability towards the end. I mean, this is a regime. Yes, it was self-sufficient, but then they become very stupid in the time of revolution, and they can't handle it. And you need 39 countries and a million, excuses to maintain. Um, and still, they gave Assad the way out. Uh, they in the last 2 3 years, I think we talked about this when we were sitting. In the last 2 3 years, you saw that they were inviting him to capitals like Riyadh. That he was participating in the solution against the crimes against humanity in Gaza. He was talking about how we need to kind of like, ironically, establish justice for these people. The embassies were opening up. European nations were talking about sending people back to Damascus because the war is over, the trauma is over. Despite all that they know, of course, that this is kind of stupid. We
Right,
didn't
right,
know, right?
right.
The convenience of such statements. What ends up happening is that there's these truces that are happening. Assad is regaining power. He goes from almost 15% of the country to regaining 85%
Mm.
with the help of the entire world. Russia, the United States are on the ground. You have Iran, you have Hezbollah, you have the Israelis doing certain strikes for him. I mean, massive, massive cataclysmic effort put into place. And one of the things that happens is that we see Erdogan is talking about establishing, some kind of like negotiations. Uh, Erdogan being the one of the people that actually helped facilitate some of these settlements where
Mhm.
they withdrew their fighters, put them in the north, parked them in Idlib. Uh, Assad gets cocky. And by the way, Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian presidency, still has their Instagram. You could go see what he says. I mean, this is not been taken down. You can see that in July he posted his trip to Riyadh, and he thinks kind of like his ground troops are shouting that he's Allah, astaghfirullah alim, that he's returned to power and he's all powerful and whatever. And but you can also see when they asked him, they said one of the reporters asked him, he says, Erdogan has asked to meet with you a couple of times. And then he gives like this whole messed up question about like I don't need to meet with Erdogan. Kind of what he thinks that he has time, he can negotiate for better terms. I don't need to meet with Erdogan on
Mm.
his terms. I'll meet with on my terms. I want him to move from such and such area. Whatever. What ends up happening is Subhanallah, Russia gets sucked into the war in Ukraine. Hezbollah and Iran get into certain trouble with the occupied uh, I guess entity in Palestine. and they become weakened. And once they withdraw, this is a regime that has lost from his loyalist troops. Some estimates put that his loss from the Alawi sect as high as 500,000 men. So this is a weakened regime.
Mhm.
Now, justice and truth, where truth needs to be said, these are not cowards. They're a force to be reckoned. These are people who have fought just as hard to maintain the status quo, but they're exhausted.
Mhm.
And this is I think when we talked about it, I said I doubt that it is in their plans to march on Damascus. When Aleppo fell, I assumed maybe they had come to some compromise where the area of influence of Turkey would grow, right? This is the natural thing to think. And then days later, Damascus falls. And when Damascus falls, everybody looked at me and I had my moment of truth, like what happened here? This doesn't make sense.
Mhm. Mhm.
I was listening to a podcast, subhanAllah, I was listening to a podcast in the days that followed. This is an Islamic oasis for anybody who's interested. And Shajul Islam is a doctor embedded with Hayat Tahrir Sham. The rebels that are with the greater, I guess, alliance that is kind of, they call themselves strategic partners of Turkey. He says this is their own man, their own doctor, very respected. He says that these people were given enough to maintain a small fight. You can go. He says I had a conversation with one of their top brass leaders. And he says I don't have enough food to give my guys. I don't have enough fuel to give my guys. I've given them just enough ammunition for this little war. And this little war is a nudge into what they call the safe zone. This is a 30-kilometer, 15-mile like radius around Idlib. This is not. It's not very. It's not a huge fight. And what happens is, Subhanallah, I guess this they had not planned for it. But what happens is the amount of weight because of what appears to be internal corruption by Assad to his own men. I'm not talking about internal corruption for the country. This is the story of this history, right? Uh, they fold without fighting, and when they fold without fighting, two things happen. Number one, the front line of fighters who are refugees. I mean, this is the town of Idlib has 4 million people, but those 4 million people are not from Idlib. Those people are from the south. They had to leave due to these truces and due to these settlements that they made with Assad. They're from the east. They're from the west. They're from all over Syria. These people want to go back to their homes. These people want to see justice against Assad. So they see that the troops are collapsing. This is number one. Number two, this is not from me. This is from Shajul Islam. He says that they began to take spoils.
Mhm.
So the ammunition that they did not have, they took from the retreating army. The fuel that they did not have, they took from the retreating army. If they needed anything extra, they were taken along their way. So this became a self-sufficient movement, right? This is number one. Number two, we saw a small pause in the fight. So when they arrived at Hama, they held. They pumped the brake and they need to come to some kind of understanding with the greater powers that be that they can march into Damascus. I'm not sure. This is all going to come out in later times. Whether or not why the decision was made to allow them to advance on Damascus. One possible explanation could be the southern, I guess, forces that are in Syria began advancing on Damascus when they saw this collapse. Another another explanation could be just the fact that the replacement had ripened. They saw that it was fit. Um, but what we know is that had they marched on Damascus, there wouldn't have been any real uh, opposition. And we see this right now. We see this because some of their videos have been I guess leaked. What appears to have happened, and this is pure speculation analysis on my part. I don't want this on anybody. What appears to have happened is Assad had been kind of very generous with his fighters during the war, and during the peace. This is goes back to the nature of the Syrians. During the peace, he became less generous, and he went kind of back to reclaiming his throne and his godship. And when he needed them again, when he needed another, you know, theater of operations, these people were not willing to come together. And this is again, this is the people of Syria could be difficult to govern during times of peace.
Yeah, well,
So
that's a amazing analysis, and a lot of like people they're trying to say like this was just an orchestration event. This was just something that happened, and the West and Israel was behind it, and I think that really is it takes away the agency of the Muslim Ummah, because as we see the people on the ground in Syria, like you mentioned earlier as well, they don't take no for an answer, and they're willing to continue to fight over decades and decades. So without understanding the reality, people will people all of a sudden become what do they say, like armchair experts, right? After something happens. But I guess as Muslims we have to understand that this anything can happen by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and tides can turn in the favor of the ummah. I guess my question to you is, why was when I was reading about spring, when I was reading about Syria in the 2016, around that time, there seemed to be so many different factions and interfighting that was happening. So what allowed HTS to kind of galvanize and become the most, I guess, the group that was going to lead the charge, I guess.
HTS is basically born out of a different organization known as Jabhat al-Nusra, which is kind of a splinter group of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was not Al-Qaeda, but Jabhat al-Nusra was one of many factions that started. The reason that there were many factions is because this was not a structured army. This was not kind of founded by an external power that came and just said, "Hey, you guys want to conscript? You want to sign up? Show up and take your rifle." This was a bunch of just regular people, some of them who had military experience, some who did not, that stood up and said, "We will stand up to this oppression." Um, and Muhammad Sallallahu Muhammad. And this formed kind of organically this way. Um,
Mhm.
so that there was a lot of groups. Now, Jabhat al-Nusra, when they came to Syria, uh, for some for some reason, the people were attracted to them because they were effective fighters, and they they uh, they had some kind of thought behind them. They instituted certain services to the areas that they controlled. So what happens is that they grow. They're very effective at fighting. They're very well respected as fighters, not necessarily their ideas. And what happens is because they have the numbers, they have the strength. Once they kind of move into this area of Idlib with a whole bunch of other um, smaller factions, they kind of start to consolidate the power, um, and they become the de facto rulers. And this is kind of why they got picked out to be, um, I guess, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, to be groomed for becoming the main opposition
Mhm.
party in Idlib. They have their accusations against them, whether it was before they became HTS. On the battlefronts, they were not very tolerant of other groups. Um,
Mhm.
they had their assassinations, or at least alleged assassinations against other groups. Once they ruled Idlib, they took a couple of fighting forces out of commission. Some of them were not Islamic. There was one, I think, that was communist or socialist in nature. One of them was a Chechnyan Mujahid group. They took them out of commission as well because they opposed them. We see recently that they kind of began to round up members of Hizb Tahrir as well, because they're vocal against, at the time, they were vocal against them kind of closing up shop as far as resisting the Assad and moving their men. Um, yeah. What I was going to say though is again, this isn't just Shajul Islam, with the whole idea of that they were not planning to move on Damascus. Yeah, no. First, Shajul Islam says it, but then kind of a couple of days, 1 or 2 days later, the current I guess president of the what they call the government of Tasrif al-A'mal, which is like it means like completing tasks or whatever. It's their current government, it's a temporary government.
Uh-huh.
The temporary government. He says it himself. He says, Subhanallah, we had no expectation
Mhm.
to get to Aleppo. He's like, we had plans for Aleppo. Yes, we spoke about going to Aleppo, but this was not our goal. This was not in our plans. So it did kind of accelerate out of it went out of hand for them to control, and this was kind of a popular,
Mhm.
I guess, push towards the Bashkir. But I get that the powers that be, Turkey, they will not waste this opportunity. Um, the one of the very first, I guess, unofficial, because again, Turkey has to be careful of the way they conduct themselves, as is the United States right now. The very first unofficial official to show up was the foreign minister of Turkey. Showed up in Damascus. The head of the Turkish intelligence and his team, they showed up to Damascus, and this is well known. I mean, Al Jazeera is reporting on it, but
Mhm.
it's unofficial because it's not announced by the Turkish government. We saw Kirby when he was asked about whether they want to remove HTS off of the list of terrorism or whatever. He said no, but we have our ways of communicating with them. We have indirect channels, which means that we're talking to these people for a very long time. Um, we saw the butcher of Muslims in Palestine, Blinken. He also he put his roadmap. He says that he wants the Syrians to essentially choose their path and their self determination. But then he'll tell everybody what he does not want to see. We don't want to see. We will not allow. We will not allow. But
Mhm.
he's fast to kind of schedule meetings with Turkey. He's fast to schedule meetings with Jordan. Those are all tyrants that are just as bad as Assad for us, and we see this as kind of a negative outcome. So we hope the aspirations and hopes that the Muslims that kind of went against the grain continue to Damascus will continue. We hope that whatever this phase is, it lasts days or a year or two, sort of like a lot of the tyrants that came before through the ages, because we hope that the people of Sham continue to use their hearts and minds to be guided towards what works.
Ameen.
I- Inshallah. I mean, I think,
Inshallah.
Brother Gassim, you made some very profound points, and you offered great analysis for us, not just for us three here, but inshallah for our viewers. The only thing on my mind is we hope for and we pray for the best, and we pray this excitement that we felt this past week and the ummah felt is not for nothing, and we pray for a greater future, not just for the people of Syria, but for the ummah at large. And I don't know. I mean, the unfortunately we are cutting short on time, and I know you've been very generous with your time. So inshallah, I think, to be honest, I have many questions. I know Brother Abdullah, I'm sure, is dying with questions. Same with Brother Zahid. I want to, inshallah, if you're okay with it, maybe catch you on for a part two. I'm not gonna put you on the spot. Inshallah, we can discuss this afterwards. But with that being said, I do want to wrap this up for tonight, and inshallah we'll discuss it at another time. All right.
Thank you very much
Okay,
for having
Shabab.
me, brothers.
Inshallah.
جزاكم الله brother Gasim. And inshallah, with that being said, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Wa alaikum
Alaikum
Assalamu
salam.
alaikum.